Yes. Riches. Yes, wealth, money, right? Where is that at? Yeah. 5 verse 8, basically through chapter 6. Through to chapter 6. Yes. Sorry, I didn't turn my mic on. That's frustrating. I thought I did. Money is a vanity. It's a chasing after the wind. Now, here's a question I want to ask for this to think through these things. Because it's very easy for us as Christians to be like, oh man, all these things ugh, I don't want those. Those are evil. They're meaningless. Is that true? Okay, so Claire, I saw your head shake first. Why not?
I mean, it's not a bad thing to want things. It's not a bad
I'd hope not.
to,
Right?
have something to that gives you pleasure. The issue is when those things become affordable.
Okay. So the issue is when these things become the thing that we value or that we love the most. Yeah. Or where we seek meaning. So the language that I'll use for this is the source of meaning. If these things are this, that's what leads to this meaninglessness and this vanity that Solomon is talking about. So wisdom, like Ty said, is a great thing. We need to have it. It's important. But if wisdom becomes the goal of our life, like our existence is about seeking this out and searching and finding this, then what we find is that it is meaningless because it doesn't give us the fulfillment we need. For Solomon, wisdom is actually different than most of the other ones because wisdom produces sorrow. It produces mourning. Not even pleasure or greatness or joy. So that is an important part of this. It's give an example to try to put more flesh on this, this idea. Toil. Work is not a bad thing. I love work. But what's the difference, or what is the difference between me working hard at my job and it being the source of meaning for me? What does that look like differently? How do those two things look different in my life?
That's why it can be a work purpose. Your purpose in
Yeah.
or just the idea of work, not so much what you do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because what work looks like for me, if it is my source of meaning, is I work, I might work 70-hour weeks, I might work 40-hour weeks. But at the end of the day, I never stop working because my mind never lets go of it, right? That's a big difference. Because I can just be a hard worker and work 80 hours a week, but also, when I'm not at work, I cannot be at work. It's not a place that I draw meaning from, but it's something that I find meaningful. Does the difference between those two things make sense? I think that's an important distinction to make within this idea of what you worship. Do you worship your job, or do you just want to be good at your job? Because I don't think it's bad to be good at your job or to want to be good at your job. I would hope not. But that's the difference between this. It's okay, let me give one more example. Toil. Kim and I were up until 1 painting last night because we're selling our house. And we started having this conversation of things that we will miss about our house. Kim is this thoughtful, empathetic person, and I'm the opposite of that. She was, talking about missing, the first that we had with our daughter, because our daughter was 2 months old when we brought her into our house, and staying up all night, holding her and rocking her in her room because she had colic or just wouldn't go to sleep or whatever. And, Kim was well, I'll miss the peach tree in our front yard because we have a peach tree, which is awesome. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, there are no more peaches on it now, but we had bushels of peaches in July. No, we just gave them to our neighbors. Yeah. And we ate some of them too, but yeah. And they're actually really good peaches too. Lots of peach cobbler. Yeah. Peach cobbler and peach crumble for sure. And lots of peaches with whipped cream as as a snack or a treat for the kids. But anyways, she said that, right? immediately, the first thing that came to my mind was over quarantine, I decided to put in like a front patio in our house, and it was like a paver patio, so like the concrete pavers. It's like 100 square foot space in the front of our house. Took 2 weeks to like dig all the dirt out. There were bushes and stuff there. I had to uproot them. Like it was like 2,000, like on my Apple Watch, it was like 2,000 active calories a day for like a week and a half. Like of just work, because I did it for like 8 hours a day, right? Because you have to dig everything out, you have to like take out like 1.5 inches of dirt, and you have to move it somewhere else. You got to tamp it down. You got to make sure the incline or the decline goes away from the house so that the water runs away from the house. It's just all of this stuff to do. It took me like 2 weeks to prep for it. Then like a full day. Well, a full day to install it. But then even before that, like I had to go to basically every Menards in the 465 loop because there was some, like the Menards in Avon had, you know, the brick I needed. The Menards on the north side in Fishers had the sand I needed, but no one else did. Because like over quarantine, everything like outdoors was sold out. Because everyone was doing stuff, so I had to, you know, piecemeal it together. So like 3 days just going to Menards with my kids, which going to Menards with my kids also is toil. Like it's terrible. I love my children, but in the stores, they're heathens. Then doing it was like a 12-hour day. Because you have to like lay down weed, you have to lay down like a weed paper to where like weeds don't pop up. I had to lay down sand, like paver base, which is sand, and tamp it down, make sure it's level, and then everything else. Then immediately I thought, when we move, like all that hard work was for nothing. It was meaningless. I read chapter 2, verse 18, and immediately was like, I'm an idiot. Let's read it. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. I was reading this in second period 2 days ago and was like, oh. Like, it's hysterical. It's not really funny. It's like a funny, oh, I feel like crap now, not like a funny ha-ha. When I read that, I was like, man, like that is exactly what I'm thinking about. Because when we move, someone else will enjoy it, right? And all that toil, if like my value comes from like being a man and doing that, then it's worthless. All of these things are good things. Pleasure is a good thing. Money is a good thing. Wisdom, all of them. But they become bad when they get out of order in our life, right? When they become the priority, when they become our source of meaning, then we realize that they actually produce sorrow, sadness, addiction, grief, frustration. But if they just become a means to the end, like a way that we can enjoy life, then I think that puts them in their right place. That leads us into the second question. Number 2, where does Ecclesiastes tell us that we can find meaning? Yeah.
To enjoy our work.
Yes. What verse?
3:22 and 5:19.
Yes. I'm just going to write joy because I think he says, right, like eat, drink, and be merry and enjoy the work that God has given you, right? Yeah. I'm going to say 16 through 24. I think that's right. Oh, no, I was way wrong. 3:9 through 15. I was way off. Because what were the verses that you said?
I said 3:22 and 5:19.
Okay, right after that. Yeah. So I saw that there was nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? That's a great example of this. Within the context of like verses 16 through 22, where Solomon is saying, we're all going to die, so just enjoy what you're doing in the day, which is very similar to what he says in verses 9 through 15. In verses 12 and 13, we'll just read that. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. That phrase, they should eat, drink, and be merry. They should do good, right? And more specifically, that eat, drink, and take pleasure in all his toil. What does he mean by that? Because if we say that that is a source of meaning, how is that different than like all of this other stuff? Eat, drink, find pleasure and all of that stuff, right? How is that actually like not contradicting what we're saying before of like all of these things are not the point of life? But then he says, well, eat, drink, and, take pleasure in what you do. How does meaning and like happiness and joy actually How do happiness and joy give us a sense of like where we can find meaning?
I could say like, I don't know. I feel like all this kind of time into purpose. I don't know. But it's
It's
like
okay.
the purpose of for like finding purpose in your life, but to also not be prideful, but to, like it says, find joy in just what you're doing.
I think that that's great. Here's the way that I would put it. Enjoy momentary, I'm going to say pleasures, just as like pleasures would encapsulate all of this stuff, right? Enjoy momentary pleasures. That's what he's talking about. He's not saying find meaning and ultimate value and deep sustainable joy in those things, but enjoy them as such. Like, know what they are. I'm going to qualify this. Enjoy momentary pleasures, but see them for what they are. Enjoy momentary pleasures, but see them for what they are. Like, toil is not a bad thing, as long as you see it as just a day's work, as a means to this other place that is the source, this other thing that is the source of your meaning, the source of meaning for you. You know what I mean by that? Like, work can become an act of glorification to God in that sense. But if work becomes the way that you find meaning, then that's going to end in heartache. End in vanity and like chasing after the wind, like Solomon says. So yeah, enjoy, absolutely.
You said toil is not a bad thing as long as you see that as a day's work. But sometimes I feel like this overtakes tradition just because you see it. Like for us, if you got a job, like work is your job. I mean, like two jobs work.
Yeah.
So then like school kind of overtakes your life a little bit and overpowers like your freedom
Yeah.
with like homework and just wanting to try to do good in school. So I don't know, I feel like it's a bad thing.
Are you working for spending money, or are you working because you have to work? Both? All right. Because I think there's a difference in like why you might get a job. Like, speaking not necessarily from your perspective, from a high schooler who works. I worked only for spending money. It made my time cramped in high school. It made my time cramped, but it was only because I could actually like have gas money and like have money to go out and eat with friends and stuff like that. Not stuff that I needed to do, but stuff that I wanted to do. There are some people that have to work because they help pay bills in high school, right? Like, I have to work at Bob Evans because I have to help my mom, like, keep her lights on so that I can, you know, do my homework and have internet and stuff like that. Those are two different things, I think, clearly. And I think that regardless of those two different things, what I'm trying to get at is that work, even as a high schooler, if that is the thing that you value most, then it's going to be tricky. What you're trying to say is like feeling overwhelmed and like feeling like I don't have time for anything else because I go to school and I work.
Because what you said earlier about it, just like it's still in your mind. Like you work, you know, I can work 40 hours a week or I can work 70 hours a week, but you're always thinking.
No, I'm not always thinking of it. Or maybe sometimes I am, but that's when I realize that like I'm probably focusing too much on it. When I go on vacation and can't like disconnect, checking email, thinking about lesson plans, stuff like that, and like actually enjoy like being in the presence of my kids, like at a lake house or something like that, then that's when it becomes problematic, obviously. Whether I work 70 hours, 40 hours a week, doesn't matter. Some days, some weeks I need to work that much because I have grading or, you know, whatever else. Other weeks, maybe I don't. I think that what you're getting at is that, here's how I would respond to that. People can have two similar actions at a job for two totally different reasons, right? Like, I can work 80 hours a week just because it's a busy week or because I want to work hard. I can also work 80 hours a week because I desire money, pleasure, new things, success, honor, things like that. I think that those two reasons why those two people work 80 hours a week are totally different, which makes their actions different. Does that make sense? One draws from their work. It's their source of meaning. For me, it's just a way that I glorify God through working hard and spending that time, which naturally means that I have to change the way that I spend the rest of my time, not being on my phone as much, and when I do, realizing there are consequences to that, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? It's a really hard line to draw, and one that is very easy for me to say, but I can guarantee you that tonight I'll be playing with my kids and thinking about what we need to do tomorrow. But knowing also that I shouldn't. So that's a good point.
How do we know what our source is?
It is what you love the most. It's not a great response, but I think it is. Because whatever your source of meaning is, it's the well that you draw from to help you understand why you're breathing in that moment. It's the thing that you love and value the most. That's why I think that if you love and value, success and honor and, whatever else, then you can work that 80-hour work week and be great. But if I worship and I love the most God, I can still work an 80-hour work week, maybe not every week, because then that might create an addiction or further problems. But knowing that it's being a hard worker, and there's two different ways of that. Those are two different examples. I think it's one of those things that because either you acknowledge it and you want to change, or you acknowledge it because you feel nasty about it, that you're in the wrong, or you acknowledge it and it's a healthy thing, because your source, the source of meaning for you is this deep well of the Lord, as opposed to my job, toil, pleasure, things like that. In all honesty, it's one of those things that when you experience it, you immediately recognize it. And then you either ignore it or you go with it. Or you change, sorry. You ignore it or you change. Right? We'll talk a lot more about that in the coming days when we talk about what we love and what we worship. So, that's a great question. The other place, too, for the question number 2, ran out of time, is God. It's a little bit less obvious, though, in this. Chapter 2, verse 26, I think is the key source of this. And there are a couple other places as well. But Solomon says, "For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind." God becomes the source of our meaning, where we can draw meaning from, because he becomes the reason why we do things, why we act, why we seek money, why we seek wisdom, pleasure, toil, success, advancement, all of that. This is what is called rightly ordering our loves. To put these things first is a disorder love. To have this first is a rightly ordered love. Okay? So, here's the last one. Also, Ecclesiastes 8 through 12 is just riddled with this idea that God is the source of our meaning, is where we draw our purpose and value from. Then he finds that actually all of these other things gain even more meaning and value. They just aren't the end-all, be-all. Question number 3. What's the tone of Ecclesiastes for you guys when you read it? What'd you say? Yeah.
I said a tone of regret and sadness for seeking meaning in what was meaningless.
No regrets. Yeah, regret and sadness. I read Ecclesiastes and I feel like it's like a grandpa telling his grandson or granddaughter his life story and saying, don't make the same mistake. That's what I think about when I read Ecclesiastes. Absolutely. What else? Yeah, Mitch.
Well, it's a little bit depressing at the beginning, but also it kind of has the feel of
Yeah, I got you. I'm going to put this word up. Sobering. Because it can be depressing, but also it's depressing like with a point. I mean, that's what sobering is, right? Like if something is sobering, it's something that awakens us to what we're really doing, our condition, where we're going wrong, and it shows us the path out of it. Whether we choose that or not, that's a big question mark. Or that's still a question mark, I should say. So yeah, sobering I think is a good way of like saying that, but it is also depressing in and of itself. What else? Yeah, Ty.
I said realistic.
Realistic?
Like, yeah, you are gonna die. Like, your work doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. See, here's the thing though, like I would say that putting work as your source of meaning doesn't matter. But when you actually say, we're all going to die at some point, that actually makes work more meaningful. Not as like the end, but as just a means to the end, right? So there's this I gave an assembly about it, I think over J-Term a couple of years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. There's this old Latin saying called memento mori. Are you guys familiar with this? Memento mori?
No, but you rode the bike.
No, maybe it was over J-Term. It's why I have the skull. It's sitting up there. Because like the skull is a sign of our death, like our mortality, right? Memento mori is Latin for the phrase "remember your death."
Was this the one where you told a story about you and your wife sitting in a restaurant or something? Someone sat in a restaurant with their wife and talked for like hours about like death.
Oh yeah, that's the one that I talked about because it was on Valentine's Day. Yeah. It was actually one of the best Valentine's Day like dates and conversations I've had with my wife, where we talked about like what song we would play at our funeral and like what we want our funeral to be like and stuff like that. Yes, memento mori, but it's even though we haven't died, remembering your death is remembering that you are mortal, that you will die. And so for Saint Benedict, which is the rule of Saint Benedict is where this idea of memento mori comes from, he says, remember your death. The man who remembers his death is the man who brings meaning to his daily practices. That is what I mean when I say when we actually realize that we're all going to die, our work becomes more meaningful. Not as a thing that defines who we are and like gives us that sense of meaning, but knowing that like we want to do something that is important, but not something that gives us importance. I want to love like my friends and my wife and my kids like a lot and really intensely and hard because, not because that's where I draw meaning from, but because that's an act of I know I'm not going to be here forever. And I want to make every moment count in like the cheesy, way, right? Or not in the cheesy way, but that's like the cheesy language for it. That becomes like that's what gives this all even more meaning and intensifies why I choose to like not seek after, but to produce these things, to gain these things, because I know that they have their right place in my heart and in my mind. They are just byproducts of my desire to seek after, worship, and glorify God, and to love other people. So yeah, I'm not like disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying, man, even more so, it makes it even more important. I mean, you can think about that with anything. Like this is why your thesis statements, your thesis papers are so great, because like you could think about like writing a thesis on memento mori and sports, writing a thesis on memento mori and relationships, writing a thesis on memento mori and the Trinity, right? Like all possible. All really interesting thesis statements and ideas. Ideas, not a statement because there's no statement in there. But thesis ideas. But yeah, that's where it becomes up to you. Okay. So yes, here's what I would say. Sobering is the one that always comes to mind for me because we're my watch is dead. Okay, we're doing well in time. Because the objective of all of this discussion is to show that Ecclesiastes is not a feel-good book. It's a book that is meant to disquiet our souls. Ecclesiastes is not a feel-good book. It's a book that is meant to disquiet our souls. part of its skepticism is meant to unveil its meaning. So it's like skepticism with all of the things that we do is part of what it's actually getting at. Here's what Solomon says in chapter 7, which is not what you guys read, so I wouldn't expect you guys to have, read this or gone through this. But he does say it in verse 18 in chapter 1. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. So wisdom, for Solomon, produces mourning. How is wisdom the result of mourning? What is it about wisdom that produces that mourning or sorrow?
Sort of like what we talked about in knowledge, like we try to distract ourselves, but like if you truly are wise and like truly like get down and try to understand like why the human condition is the way it is, and you truly get into the depth of like how imperfect we are,
Mm-hmm.
it makes you very sad that like that's the way it is. Like you then enter a state of mourning for like all of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well, kind of what Hannah said from like Pascal's reading, knowing our wretchedness and seeing like suffering around the world or like just even in yourself is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say not even around the world, because we're still talking about ourselves. And Solomon is talking about himself and like his own experience with life. Let's go over here to this. Visual noise is this like ignorance is bliss mentality. And that's really what I would put underneath here. Solomon uses it as the house of the fool. What is it? But the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure, right? Ignorance is bliss in that sense. This visual noise is just living in ignorance, right? It's just not even being able to think about anything else. Knowledge that begets wisdom is the moment that we pierce through or sift through this visual noise and begin to see our true condition. Then we get this question of, okay, well, what's next? I know that I'm wretched, and I know that I have this greatness, but like I haven't achieved that yet. That's where mourning comes in for him. Solomon knows that he's been searching for meaning in all this crap. So he knows that he's been living incorrectly. But then also, he knows that there is something else that can like actually give him value and meaning and help give meaning to everything he does. But he has yet to attain it. He feels like in this moment with Ecclesiastes. That's where we choose this, right? The pursuit of the transcendent. We don't distract, we don't despair, but we know that we have a choice. This choice is built into the conversation of the concept of worship. So when you acknowledge or when you recognize wisdom, knowing my condition produces mourning. Well, mourning for a moment, but then you have to ask yourself the question, okay, well, what is it that you value most? What is it that is your source of meaning? What is it that you worship? That's the question of purpose, okay? What do you worship? What do you love most? And then how does that impact why you are breathing now and why you exist? So, let's talk about this really quickly. What is worship? What does it mean to worship? Yeah.
I believe praise.
Praise? Praise what?
I mean, as Christians, God, but I mean, other religions and stuff can like worship different things or like idolize different people.
Okay, yeah. So like praising someone or something. Yeah? Yeah, sorry.
I would say it's like to praise something that you think is like above you. Like I could praise like a teammate or like equal, but then worship would be like God or something.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's giving like glory and honor to for like us God, but like to something that we think deserves it.
Yeah.
Any act that gives glory and honor to a certain person.
That's really good. Yeah. Let me give you my definition, which is kind of a combination of all of those things. It is reverence and adoration of someone or something. Reverence and adoration of something. In another class, a student said, well, worship is just asking like what you value most, what you love the most. And that's really perfect because for us, in this section, the language of worship and love are synonyms. We're talking about the same thing. When I ask you, what do you worship? Really what I'm asking you is, what do you love? What do you love as most? All right? Now here's the second question for this. Do all humans worship? Like, is there anyone that doesn't worship? Okay, Claire, you're shaking your head no. Explain that.
I think that every person has something that doesn't give reverence and adoration to, even if they do it without knowing.
That's an interesting thesis idea.
A big thing would be like, do we worship our cell phone? Like, no one's thinking like, oh, it's my cell phone, like bow down to it. No one's doing that, but like, are we actually doing it unintentionally?
What is the thing that you are giving your love and your that you are love to and that you are gaining value from? Absolutely. Tomorrow I'm not going to be here because I'm taking a half day because I have to take care of my son while my daughter goes to a hearing appointment. But you guys are going to watch a video by a guy named David Foster Wallace. David Foster Wallace has this commencement speech that is just incredible and deals specifically with this, called This Is Water. And in it, he makes this claim where he says, everyone worships. It's not a matter of do you, but it's a matter of what do you worship. And here's the two things that people worship. Either something outside themselves, like a god, or themselves. So we either worship a god or man. So when we even talk about like worshiping our cell phones, really that's just an act of like worship of the self. Because like our cell phones are ours. There are personalities built into it. It's where some of us gain value and meaning from. Not even talking about social media, but like think about the moment that you lose your cell phone. My entire life! Like if I lose my cell phone, I'm sad because I'm poor and I don't want to pay for another one. Not because it's my entire life. If that's the case, your life is small and your life is terrible. Like I'm not trying to be mean. But that's the reality. Like it's stuff. We either worship God or ourselves. Tomorrow what we're going to get into is talking about how this is the case and the problems with it. What happens when we truly worship ourselves as opposed to worshiping God? We get a feel for what Ecclesiastes is talking about, but most importantly, we find that when we worship ourselves, the things that we love, the things that we use as like a means to the end rather than the end of themselves, like pleasures, toil, stuff, actually become something that eats us alive rather than something that gives us any sense of meaning or value. The word for that is addiction, but we'll talk about that tomorrow more. Worship and love, two sides of the same coin when we talk about why do I exist. So it's not do you worship or do you love, it's what do you love as most. That's kind of the question of this topic, okay? Let me end with this one statement, just as like a wrap up. Worship is an innate part of human life that allows for humanity to find meaning or ultimate value. Another word for ultimate value, deep sustainable joy, right? What keeps you going? Worship is an innate part of human life that allows for humanity to find meaning and ultimate value. So tomorrow we'll continue with this, and then, we'll go from there, all right? So you probably watch the video and then have like a couple discussion questions to fill out and submit via Canvas. Or submit via email, one of the two. Thank you guys so much.